Welcome to Yachting International Radio's Yachting USA podcast. I'm your host, Rick Thomas. This podcast is all about the U.S. North American yachting industry. We are here to put it up, push it up, make it better, and in the context of doing so, talk to some really interesting people that have had a long tenure in the game, and today is no exception. I am pleased to be sitting with my friend Michael Moore of Moore & Company, and I think our conversation today will be fascinating, and I am looking forward to getting into this with you, Michael. Thanks for joining me. This is going to be fun.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Good. So, listen, this is what I want to say here. We've been in the game a long time, and I thought I was in for a long time, but I was talking to you the other day and realized that you've got me by a decade or so.
Well,
even though they were the same age, I don't know how that works, but
you know, it's a Dorian Gray thing. I'm now representing the grandsons of the people that I first started representing.
Wow.
And that's a wonderful thing to have families so cool. That I started off with the father, moved to the son, now I'm moved to the grandson.
That's you know what? Not a lot of people can make that claim. And,
you know, it's a wonderful thing.
And as we were just speaking a few minutes ago, you're having a good time doing it still.
Exactly.
It's, you know, and that's
every
what
day
it's all
is a beautiful
about.
thing. I learn something new every day.
That's a good day, and I tell you what, I'm all about that. I think that's part of growing in our careers, growing in our disciplines, what we do, and you do what you do very well.
Well, thank you.
Oh yeah, we've known each other for a long time. I'm thinking 15, 20 years anyway.
I'd say at least.
This firm has been established now. This year is your 20th year, right?
That's right. 2004.
Fantastic. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
This month.
Mm-hmm. Cool. There you go.
Yep.
Well, happy Valentine's Day.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Doesn't it, though? But this isn't how you began. Could you walk us down the path a little bit? You were in maritime law going way back. You're a Florida boy, like me.
Yeah.
And you found a passion for the sea, and I understand aviation.
True.
And just give us a 4-minute rundown of.
Well, you know, it's actually it is my story, and so I like it. It started out with the law school revelation that there were some very bright people in that room, and I realized for the first time in my academic career that I could not achieve exactly what I wanted to achieve.
Wow.
It just wasn't possible. I mean, I could study 24 hours a day, don't sleep, don't eat, and I probably still would not get a better grade than my best friend in law school, Bobby Gibbons.
Okay. A little competition, a little rivalry there?
He was brilliant, and just to show you how smart he was, when he graduated first in the class, he became a Jesuit priest.
Okay.
You know, I mean,
that's
we'll
an interesting twist.
We'll talk about that in another podcast.
Okay,
but
fair enough.
Bob is an authority on canon law.
All right.
But Florida is surrounded by water, and it seemed to me there was a need for a good maritime lawyer.
Indeed.
Commerce among nations sounded great. The romance of the sea was wonderful. I'd been introduced to the northeastern part of the United States as a waiter on Cape Cod. And the whole maritime nautical tradition, the history of America really in microcosm. We started out on Chesapeake Bay, as you know. Yeah. That just sounded phenomenal to me, and I just knew it would be something I could do. It would be a wonderful thing. And I clerked for 2 years with the firm that I had identified as the best law firm in America. I thought it was.
What firm was that?
That was a firm, Burlingham, Underwood, and Lord. Very old guard, white shoe law firm.
Okay.
And it had gone back 140 years by the time I started there. They represented the owners of the Titanic. That's one of the name brand cases.
There you go.
You know, but it was just every case that we had and every case they'd handled just seemed fascinating to me. You know, sinkings, collisions, groundings, buying, selling. That was nice. So when I graduated in June 7th of 1974, I started with them on June 8th of 1974.
Whoa.
Yeah, and
segueing right into your career.
It's been a beautiful thing from day one.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Awesome. When I met you, I think you had recently left Holland and Knight, and that's kind of what I knew of your background. So obviously you segued into that organization before you started your own.
Yeah, that was really one of those things that I highly recommend to anyone who's trying to figure out their career path. I'd practiced in New York, I'd practiced in Saudi Arabia, I'd stayed with maritime law in Saudi Arabia. Then my wife and I had to decide where we wanted to live when we grew up. And after eliminating several other port cities, San Francisco, New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, we settled in on Miami. It was kind of a clear choice. Big port, fledgling new cruise industry, enough yachts, and the commercial business was there, so it was perfect. And so
much different city back then than it is
very
today.
much so. But there was a young man, not so young, well, he probably was young when I met him, but I'd been told to look him up when I was in Saudi Arabia. His name was Ted Arison. And I was told to do that by a guy named Knut Kloster. Knut Kloster had founded a cruise line called Norwegian Cruise Lines. He owned a yacht. He owned a ship called the France, formerly that he renamed Norway.
Okay.
Caused quite a little bit of unrest in France, I might add. But he was a brilliant man, and he said, contact my friend Ted Arison when you get to Miami. He's going to go places. So I got to Miami, and I looked him up, and I said, what's your vision? He said, I'm going to build a cruise line. I'm starting with these two boats I have. One was called the Mardi Gras, which is an old boat, not that great, small cruise ship. The other one was the Festival, which he had on charter. And he said, I'm going to call it Carnival Cruise Lines. So that was the beginning of the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It's very
Wow.
true. It was amazing.
Yeah, to think back at the start of these things, because we take for granted these shipping lines, these cruise lines, they've been around forever, but they haven't. There's a genesis for each of them and a story behind each of them.
And people say you didn't build that, or how it's absolutely false.
Right.
He had nothing. He built that cruise line. He now owns 13 cruise lines within the shell of
Carnival.
Carnival. His first yacht, I did his first ever personal boat, a 60-foot Hatteras. I bound the closing papers like I would of $200 million LIBOR financing, put his name on there and made it really nice. It was a bound volume, and I gave it to him.
Sweet.
Yeah, and recently someone came to me in my law office and said, I know you said clean out that room that's kind of full of paper at this point, but I thought you might want to keep this. And he gave me that closing volume, and I gave it to Mrs. Arison, who is still alive.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned your office, and I've walked through your office a few times, and I would encourage anybody that has an interest in maritime law, maritime history, to come make a courtesy call and have a look. Every corner is a little gem. There are so many cool little things. We stood in front of a map last time I was here for quite a while, and just that's almost mesmerizing. Looking at the world's oceans and understanding what that looks like.
You start to realize what you do for a living. It's not just, you see it in a different way. I mean, it's a mantra that I've been thinking of recently about and you get, when you're young, you say, well, that old guy he's done well, so he can say that. But it's a truism. Do what you love.
Yep.
The money will follow.
Yep.
And on my wall, I think maybe you've seen the three. I have more than that because my law firm in New York threw out these charts, these paper charts. They were already close to 100 years old.
You showed those to me
when they threw them out. I'm thinking
Crazy.
You're throwing out gold here, as far as I'm concerned. This is
maritime
history gold.
Yeah.
And all of those charts are now about 124 years old, and at the youngest is, and they don't make them anymore.
Right.
It's all electronic now.
Yeah.
But I'd love to imagine the artist who drew the charts, who drew the shoreside reference points. Each artist was different, but each one got a commission. You're being commissioned to draw the port of Newport. You're being commissioned to draw the port of Manhattan, which is the East River and Hudson River. You're being commissioned to draw fill in the blank. I mean, it was every major port in America. And we were things were moving. It was fantastic, and they threw them away. And
Genuine artistry, really.
Yeah.
Which is a segue into a conversation that I have with captains and people in this industry where we've seen this industry evolve to almost exclusive electronic charts.
Right.
And yet, the boats are still built with map storage and big map tables. And I'm a big advocate of old school in that way. You ought to learn how to use a compass and sextant and be able to use charts and navigate with charts, because, what happens if, God forbid, GPS goes down for a while or you lose your electronics? You still have a seaworthy vessel. You want to be able to navigate it, right?
Celestial navigation. What if you're in a lifeboat?
What about that? Yeah. And there's some pretty cool stories about people in lifeboats.
Do you remember the first time you ever noticed that one of the stars in the heavens was not moving?
Yeah, that was a while ago. But when I was actually working offshore, I loved the night shift. I would take the 11:30 to 11:30 shift.
Okay.
And anytime I've delivered boats or been on boats where I had the privilege or luxury of standing watch, the dog watch is mine.
There you
4
go.
a.m. in the morning, cup of
man.
coffee at the helm. And the stars absolutely are stunning, spectacular. Yeah. And you do start noticing the nighttime sky and how things change and how things don't.
And I remember lying on a deck of a sailboat, not having the background that you do. I'm not a sailor. I did not go to the academies. I did not go to the Naval Academy or one of the service academies. I think it's a part of my success, because I've always hired people that knew what they were talking about. I never assumed I did.
Right.
I always hired great experts, and whether it was in navigation or rules of the sea or rules of the navigable road, the coal regs, the collision regulations, or MARPOL violations. I always hire the best of the best that I can identify to be my expert.
Perfect.
Yeah,
that's what you want. Well, it's interesting. Yeah. My maritime history goes back to 1979, 1980. I went to the Florida Institute of Technology, FIT, in the Jensen Beach campus.
Nice.
It was a small college, and I went into their underwater technology program. My parents wanted me to go to college. I was accepted to UF and USF, and I wanted to go to work. And it was stupid me. And we made a compromise, and I did a 2-year degree program, which was really unique in underwater technology. It was all about commercial diving.
Wow.
But full maritime skills and everything else associated with the degree program. And that got me on track to get out in the Gulf of Mexico. And I spent 4 years in the Gulf commercial diving. What was my takeaway was, looking back, how applicable that time at sea was in understanding what it is to be on the ocean, live on the ocean, work on the ocean, deal with the environment of the ocean, what it does.
So it was fantastic.
The perspective you have, the understanding you have to see the ocean one morning, a mill pond where you could literally water ski between the oil rigs, and 48 hours later we're in 6-7 meter seas.
Oh, yeah. That'll
get your attention real quick.
It's totally true. You become you're also see your place in the grand scheme of the cosmos. You're really insignificant, but at the same time you kind of realize how powerful as a person you are. That you're a human, and the world is your oyster, in the sense that. As an American, there's no limits to what I grew up thinking there was no limits to what I could achieve. But I also had parents who always told me, just follow your dreams, Michael. Don't try to assume that somebody else's dream is going to work for you.
No, exactly. You do it.
And I remember that was very good advice. I always follow. That's been one of my mentors.
So, Michael, one of the objectives I have in doing this podcast, and I would have never guessed, 2-3 years ago I'd be doing this podcast. And ironically enough, 2 years ago at the Palm Beach Boat Show, I'm walking the dock with Kit Dennison. I had just left nautical structures after 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
was that long? Wow.
Yeah.
No, I had no idea.
3.5 decades.
I think I told you I always spec'd nautical structures in new build constructions. When I had the opportunity to spec Which, everybody does it differently. Everybody has a team that's different. But in some occasions, I would have the opportunity to say, well, which passerelle would you like, or which gangway, or whatever.
Right.
And I'd say, check out nautical structures. I mean, they just stay put in a hurricane. They're
Okay,
great.
pay attention, everybody. That's how this industry works.
No, that's right.
It's how this industry works.
Totally the way it works. Small industry.
And a little segue there. I started that in the back of my dad's shop when I left the diving industry. And that's a whole other podcast, do one day.
Yeah.
But it was a slow build, and then I hooked up with a great gentleman by the name of Bob Boleen, who was at the time working for my biggest competitor. And he joined with me. We met at the boat. We sat down and put the deal together at the Miami Boat Show.
I love
How about that? And we decided we're going to combine our efforts. He was building boats with Kit Dennison at Dennison for a long time. He understood shipbuilding, and of course I came from my maritime background, and we said we're going to build the very best of the best that we know how to do, and we did.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about setting the bar high, and you do it. You realize that not everybody's your client, but that's okay.
That's okay.
There's enough other companies that feed the middle ground and the mediocrity part. And yes, this industry does have some mediocre product as well. But it's an aspiration to try to achieve a high standard and set that high standard.
Go for the best.
So Kit and I were walking the docks during the Palm Beach Boat Show 2 years ago, and he said to me, Rick, you got to consider doing your own podcast.
I remember hearing your voice. I heard this voice that I did not recognize overlay on a video of what is called The Crossing.
Oh, yeah.
Which you participated in, but maybe your listeners might not. But it was a crossing from Bimini to Palm Beach, effectively south of Palm Beach, by
84 miles.
paddle boat.
Paddleboards.
Paddleboards.
Yep, and kayaks, but
where
mostly
you
paddleboards.
would paddle the whole way. It was a paddle, and that was the crossing, designed to raise money for cystic fibrosis, and that sounded like a cool thing. Anything that's on the water, I like. And my charity, these people had come to me, and I said, I think it's a great fit. It's a perfect fit for us. There was one guy who was a champion of the idea, Dick Seidenspinner.
Good guy.
And but when I heard the voiceover, it was your voice. And I said, that's a great radio voice.
I've done it 2 years with Seakeepers Society. We'll circle back to Seakeepers later in this conversation. I want to talk about that. But to your point, it was my first time, and we went over with a film crew, and they mic'd me up, and I completely forgot. It was, the trip over was only 2 hours. Cool. The trip back was almost 17 hours.
I've seen
what people
trip.
don't understand is my boat, for instance, was leading Team Seakeepers, and I was the navigator essentially and the helmsman, cruising at a whopping 4 to 5 knots, mostly 4.
Mostly on the Gulfstream, I guess.
Well, the Gulfstream moved us up maybe almost to 6, but that was a period of time.
Sure.
We leave the island at midnight. It's dark, and there was 180 paddlers in the water. What could possibly go wrong? But what an experience! And you touched on that. My wife Lisa had cystic fibrosis, passed away in 2018.
I'm aware of this.
And so for me and my boys, it really was and is a charity and a cause. It's important to us, and it's great to put a spotlight on it and see the gene therapy and things that are being done now that are helping people with CF. And we love the idea of doing something with our boat on the ocean that raises money for a cause that's something beyond ourselves and something we can tangibly identify with. And yes, we're going to do it again this year.
Those little boats, I understand. I mean, I'm a part of it, but they don't tell me everything. That are now carrying loggers, which map the ocean
Seabed 2030.
Seabed 2030.
My boat surface interval has one.
Seabed 2030 came onto our radar screen on September 22nd, 2022. I was going to say. Excuse me, in London, on a beautiful building that looks like it's broken glass, and the English call it the Shard.
The Shard, yes.
It was a wonderful party, and into our lives walked this man named Jamie McMichael Phillips, And one of my colleagues says, you need to meet this guy. He's got a great program. There's a lot to be said about that. We can talk about that too. But there's a lot to be talking about.
Yes, there is.
We are the world.
Yes, we are the world.
It's the blue part.
Let's just not let's not break into song right now, though, shall we?
Lionel Richie on the phone.
Hey, so segueing back, it's here I am doing this podcast, and this podcast really is about.
You have a face for radio. You have a face that's made for radio.
Well, perfect face for radio, absolutely. I spent an hour and a half doing my hair earlier today just to get it right. But no, my goal is to lift up the North American yachting industry. I want to say North American because while the name of the podcast is Yachting USA,
okay,
it's really about the North American because the Canadian yachting industry is real and tangible, and they have a huge contribution in our history, and I think they've got a good place in our future. So I don't want to exclude our friends to the north.
Right.
Besides, they come down here every winter and spend a lot of money. I don't pay personal income tax in Florida because of the Canadians.
We have a warm spot in our heart.
We love these guys, absolutely. So one of the things I'm doing, Michael, is I'm going back in history because I do go back in the yachting industry now 37 years.
Yeah.
And when I got involved in yachting and I started actually building equipment, I was supplying, when I say I should be careful, nautical structures. I use the term interchangeably, but there's a lot of great people at Nautical. I don't want to take anything away from that. We were supplying cool equipment to shipyards around the world, but predominantly in the United States and Canada. And at that time, I currently count 42 shipyards that were building vessels, cruiser vessels, 75, 80 feet and larger.
Right.
32 or 34 of them were building over 100 foot.
Wow.
Really cool history when you look at what was happening out west, and Westport Shipyard was building a bunch of Jack Sarin hulls and supplying a bunch of other shipyards with hulls and superstructures that got turned into the Crescent Beach Boat Yard, the Sovereign, the North Coast. These other shipyards were fed by a company by the name of Westport that was owned by Rick and Randy Rust.
Wow. Hearing you say this, if you don't mind, a bit of an interjection.
Sure.
But this is a wonderful history of the yacht world that I think is, everyone has that piece that is meaningful and should be meaningful to anyone paying attention of, kind of the how did we get here kind of question. So
yep.
I remember a man coming to me and basically saying, I've seen the future of yachting. And I said, well, you're the largest Hatteras dealer that I know of, I think maybe in the entire network. What do you think? He says, Hatteras does not want to build these boats.
Right.
But I've seen the boat that I've wanted to build as a Hatteras, and they're not interested. So I'm going to leave Hatteras and build this vessel called Golden Delicious. I said, Golden Delicious. That sounds like an apple.
Sure does.
He's an apple farmer.
Okay.
Wow. He said, but I pulled up alongside him, and I asked him where he built this boat, and he said, a place called Westport. Went down to Westport. They didn't tell us any of the stuff that you're mentioning.
Okay.
What we understood is that they did workboats and northwest workboats,
They
strong,
did that too.
sturdy,
Absolutely.
wonderful vessels. But we wanted to build yachts, and Rick and Randy weren't interested. We created a yacht brand called West Ship. And we started cranking out yachts. My client was the client, and I was the lawyer for the client. I trademarked the name West Ship. And anyway, make a long story short, the West Ship brand was born, and then, of course, when Orrin Edson came along, bought Westport, he also then bought West Ship in due course.
West Ship was built in Tampa, right?
No, you're thinking of Windship.
Windship, okay.
But the Westport thing and the West Ship thing was all out there with the Rick and Randy origins.
Okay, yeah.
And the origins of what it is today, which is a wonderful American yacht builder.
Oh, absolutely.
Westport.
Well, it's fun too, and we're going to explore this. I've already got a commitment from my friend Daryl Wakefield to sit with me.
Oh, that's the man.
Oh, isn't
He's
he?
the man.
He's a great guy, and this is the part where YPY. Are you paying attention? We're going to be talking to you guys too. His dad, Earl Wakefield, was building at Admiral Marine Works, and they were building some of the biggest fiberglass yachts in the world.
I remember.
Aviva,
Yep.
Roxana. They built a really cool composite boat called Plum Duff. There's a whole. They were cutting edge,
That's amazing.
cool technology, and unfortunately, like so many shipyards, they stumbled. Earl stopped. Daryl was running the yard. Things became challenging. Orrin Edson came in, and as you well know, bought out Rick and Randy, and he asked Daryl to join his company. And Daryl went through the Edson phase, and when Edson Schwest come in and acquired them, stayed on. He's tenacious. He's got a great head for boat building. He's just he's a gentleman in the industry.
Totally.
We'll have fun
All the
talking about
above.
him.
Yep, all the above.
But where I'm going with this is that fast forward to 2024.
Okay.
And
that's this year.
That's right now. And there's less than 10 shipyards in North America building cruise serve vessels. Less than 10. I was going to say 6, 5, but there might be a couple I'm missing here they're building some boats. So I want to be a little careful, a little conservative. But imagine losing 75 or 80% of your infrastructure over 3 decades, and you have to go, wow. I mean, Palmer Johnson, gone. Christensen, gone. Lazare Yachts, gone.
Yep.
Northern Marine, gone. Crescent Beach Boat Builders, gone. Now Crescent Custom Yachts is just finished a Christensen hull, and they've got a beautiful boat they delivered. But they're there, and we hope they maintain and become successful. But you just go down the list and you realize Trinity. Wow, all the boats that Trinity built, gone. And we now are a completely different yachting industry today than we were. And it's maybe parts of that are inevitable. Costs of labor are high. You can go to China, you can go to Taiwan, you can go to Turkey, and you can get some pretty good quality boats built with cheap labor. That therein lies the conversation one day of, should there be some more protectionism in the United States? The Jones Act certainly was one layer of protection, does some things for us, but not a lot. There's a lot of boat dealers who might hear this podcast that will say, Rick, shut up.
Did you say the Jones Act?
The Jones Act. I mentioned the Jones Act. That's a conversation too, because it has so much influence, particularly on the larger boats we deal with.
Well, I think that to your earlier point, every single one of those yacht builders was an American yacht builder that they thought that the Jones Act would protect them. It actually sank them. What happens is that, in my view,
that's what we're talking.
It's my view. Because I think people have a very short time frame and not enough respect for history and people that make history and that move markets and do things that are we get the benefits of. Now, for example, more than 100 years ago, there was, you mentioned it before the podcast actually started, the Limitation of Liability Act.
Right.
That was passed in 1851. That was designed to protect American shipping. In other words, the idea was that if your ship sank, you should not lose everything in that loss. So it protected you to the value of the vessel that sank. Your limitation fund would be the value of the thing that sank after the sinking.
Right. And
that was the fund that was created, the Limitation of Liability Act. That was also the year, 1851, of something called the America's Cup. My very tenuous connection between the two is that they're both maritime, both legendary. They're both still here.
Thank you for joining us today on Yachting USA. I hope you found my conversation with Michael Moore as captivating as I did. But guess what? Our adventure on the high seas is far from over. In our next episode, we'll continue our exploration with Michael, delving even deeper into the world of yachting. I'm your host, Rick Thomas, and I can't wait to see you on deck for part 2. Until then, fair winds and smooth sailing.